Okay, in this video, we're going to create Tic Tac Toe using Python. And for the game, it's going to hopefully look something like this when we finish. You click on a button and it places an X. The next player will click on a button, it'll place an O. You can click an X. Next player places an O. If you get 3 in a row, they turn yellow, and hopefully a message displaying a win or something will take place. Okay, so to get started, we're going to use Tkinter, and let me just get a new window here. And what we're going to do is, just like always, if I want to use a GUI, I'm going to start by importing from Tkinter. So just like we've always done, that's how we're sort of going to get started. We need to also think of our game and our game board as to what it's going to look like. And so if I look at my game board when I run the program that I had created here, I can see I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 buttons. So 3 in the first row, 3 in the second row, and 3 in the third row. So I'm going to create 9 buttons. And I play around a little bit with the font and with the size of the font and so forth. And so what I did, just like we did in the calculator project, is we start by defining a font. And you'll notice I use the Courier font. And one of the reasons I use the Courier font is because the letter X and the letter O are exactly the same size. It's called a monospaced font. And what that means is every letter is designed and spaced in such a way that each character takes up the same width and the same height. And the rest is just filled in with white space. And so it's a good font to use in something like this because our buttons are dynamic in the way that they'll change with different fonts. They'll get wider and shorter and so forth. And some students were getting frustrated with the calculator because sometimes the buttons were moving in the way that we're using buttons in this dynamic grid method. Okay, I'm just going to fix my source. I don't know why the screen keeps going, but let's take a quick break here. There we go. So, yeah, so I've got my font. Okay, so the next thing is I'm going to come up and make some buttons. And as I talked about previously, when I make a button, what I want to do is I want to make a button in a way that the name makes a lot of sense. And so in this case, I'm going to call my button BTN1. So lowercase btn, and then some descriptive name. Well, 1 is not the most descriptive. Normally I'd say that's not a very good name. But in this case, my form is made up with 9 buttons, and I'm going to refer to the button as button 1 and so forth. So button 1 is actually not a bad name for my buttons. So we'll do that, and we'll create 9 of these exact buttons so I can copy and paste 9 of them. And so I'll do that right now. Just copy and paste 9 buttons. And then I need to go, and once I've done that, I need to change the name and call it BTN, button 2. So the second button is going to be button 2. The text I'm putting on there is just a blank white space of a space. And that's, again, to keep the monospaced font Courier here that I'm using is going to be the same width as an X or the same width as an O. So they're all going to be the exact same size. I play around with the padding for X. So padding for X is how much space goes around on the X coordinate. And then padding for Y, I played around. And these numbers sounded good to me. But again, it's your game, and you should make it as done. And then what I did is I already decided I'm going to make a function called placing a mark. And I need to pass it not a variable, but this time I'm going to pass it the button. So when I click place mark and I define that function coming up, I'm going to pass it this button so it knows which button I'm talking about. So in this case, it'd be button 2. So I define button 2 as being a button. Its text is a space. It's got some X and Y padding on it. The font is going to be this font that I defined here called my font. And when I click on it, we're going to use the lambda. And lambda is the one-line method for calling a function. And so what function are we going to call? We're going to call place mark. And what's the argument? The argument is we're going to pass a whole button to it this time. So we're going to pass button 2 to it. So I've hopefully copied and pasted, and I've created the 9 buttons now for my tic-tac-toe game. So you can see I've got 9 buttons. So here I'm going to say that I'm going to create my 3x3 grid of 9 buttons. Each button is going to be named BTN plus a number, 1 to 9. So I make a little comment here so I know what I've done. Okay, so now I've made 9 buttons. If I was to run the program, of course, there would be nothing that would appear. That's because I've just created the buttons. In Tkinter, what we always need to do is we need to place the buttons in one of the methods, and one of the methods that's simplest is using a grid. So what I'm going to say is button 1 is going to be placed in the grid. And where is it going to be placed? In row equal to 0 and column equal to 0. So there you go on the first row. And notice the first row is numbered with 0. And in theory, if I was possibly doing this, if I was thinking like Python, I would actually maybe call these buttons 0 to 8. Perhaps, I don't know. Because 0 could be the first button. That's how they count most things in programming. But anyhow, back to what we're doing here. So button 1 is going to be in the grid, and we're going to place it in row 0 and in column 0. And then button 2 is going to be in that same row. So I want to place button 2 in the grid, and it's going to be in that same row, row 0, and it's going to be in column, this time column 1, so the second column over. And then finally button 3 is going to be in the grid, and it's row 0 as well, and it's going to be in column number 2. So now I've got my first row. Let's do the second row, and I could make a little comment here. Place first row buttons. Then I'm going to place second row of buttons, and you're probably getting a little tired of just seeing me program this, but you can start seeing the pattern on how grid works. So I use grid, row equals, this time we're on row 1, and the column is going to start at column 0. So on the second row, which is row 1, I'm going to put button 4, button 5, and button 6. And I accidentally, I don't know why, I typed that. And then finally, I'm going to place the third row of buttons. And in the third row, I will place button 7, button 8, and button number 9. And there we go. So I've got 3 rows of buttons, and that are placed. Perfect. Now the last thing I need to do, if I want to test this out, notice it would crash right now because it's makes a call up here in the buttons to place mark, a function that doesn't exist. So I'm going to just put the function in right now, even before I start defining anything. And I'll put it right at the top here. So define the function, and I'll call it place mark. It's going to take a button, and actually I'll call it button, so we know that it's a button. But I won't use a capital B, because that is the Tkinter. I'm going to use just lowercase because I want to take this button and be a local button here. So I'm going to place mark button. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pass for now, so I can run my program. So here we go. And I can run this program. And of course, I've got to save it. So I'll call it demo Tic Tac Toe. And I run the program. Oops, what doesn't it like? My font call. What did I do wrong here with my font? I don't see anything. I've imported Tkinter dot font as font. Define the font, and font equals my font. Well, maybe I'll stop the recording here and I'll fix the error, and then I'll come back and we'll do part number 2.